has the biggest roster of any faction in the game, online with Seleucids and Egypt in terms of diversity. But you don't have many generals options. You have the legatus and you have the general and bodyguard. And the legatus, I believe, is a Polybian era Roman general from when the legates were commanding armies. The general and bodyguard in the Marian era. So the legatus, these guys are fairly similar. They have pretty low morale for being a general's unit. The bodyguard has more armor, the legatus has more health, the legatus is cheaper. So you have, for the sword infantry, this is where Rome really shines. For the Polybian era units, you have these guys. Let's see here, just bring them up. You have your gladiators that are pretty good in rear charging and flanking role, but they will die to enemy charges fairly easily. They have the killing spree and the frenzy and the killing spree, and this potentially makes them able to do a lot of damage on the charge. Then you have your hastati. These are arguably the most cost-effective swords in the game in their price range. Good armor, health, morale, good melee defense, melee attack, pretty decent units. The only thing that I kind of lack is a good charge. And the same goes for the Principe. They have a pretty crappy charge, but they are extremely tanky with their high melee attack. They also have the ability attacking testudo, the same as the Triarii, which is going to block 85% of incoming missiles from the front, so very useful. And then you have two Italian ally units in the form of your Extraordinari. They have 95 armor, pretty tanky units, but still they lack the shield wall, and they won't be able to get a huge amount of kills, so you will rarely see these guys on the battlefield, and they are very expensive. The same with the equivalent of the hastati. They have a lower melee attack than the hastati by a significant amount. They are a bit cheaper, but you rarely see these guys on the battlefield. And then you have for the Polybian era spear units, you have the vigiles, which are basically like a police force of citizens, not useful for much other than soaking up charges and engaging enemy cavalry. Then you have your Triarii. They can go into square and defensive testudo. Defensive testudo increases bracing and gives them an increase in protection against missiles. The square increases their bracing, morale and melee defense, so it's going to be very difficult to kill Triarii that are in this formation. Pretty decent spare units. For your skirmishers, you have your leves, your velites, and your auxiliary balearic slingers. Leves, very cheap, very cheap javelin units. Velites, a bit more expensive, more damage, more morale. Pretty decent at taking out elephants, both of these guys. And for the long range skirmishing, we have your balearic slingers that are very good slingers, long range, good armor penetration, decent morale, and they have shields that are able to block incoming missiles. Then you have your Socii Equites Extraordinari. Very good shock cavalry for their price range. Only a 57 charge bonus, but against factions like the Lusitani and other sword factions, these guys can do a lot of damage and rob the enemy of their charges. You have the Equites and your Socii Equites. The main difference between these guys is the armor value and the morale. These guys have higher morale, these guys have higher armor. These guys have cavalry testudo, which makes the unit immobile, but increases its protection against missiles, but it's not really a useful ability. Then you have your Socii Equites that are able to do a bit better in melee against infantry because they are heavy, while these guys are medium. So these guys will have a greater knockback and more mass when they are charging. Then you have the auxiliary Numidian cavalry, which is expensive, but very fast, very good morale, and 41 missile damage with a high amount of shots per minute, so these guys can quickly bring the pain to the rear of an enemy, to enemy cavalry units, and to elephants. And you have some elephants of your own. You have the auxiliary African elephants, but you will rarely see Rome bring African elephants, and that might be because Rome has a hard time bringing a cavalry. They're going to bring so much infantry that they're going to have a hard time dealing with the bringing the cavalry dominance to take care of enemy skirmishers quickly enough. So you won't see elephants often when you're facing Rome. Then they have the cheap war dogs, useful for chasing down skirmishers, horse archers, not much else. If we get to the Marian era, the professional Roman army, we have a huge amount of good mid to high mid-tier sword infantry. So you have your armored legionaries. Legionaries with high melee attack, standard weapon damage, low charge bonus, and high armor. So this is kind of the mantra with the Roman units. You have high melee attack, but you have a small charge bonus. So anything you can do to rob your enemy of their charge bonuses is going to help you a lot in melee. So using your cavalry to charge your other to charge your opposing elite swords is going to be a useful tactic. So is bringing cheaper swords, but more on that later. The Eagle cohort doesn't get a whole lot of use because it has a pretty low melee attack for some reason. Good armor though, and that goes for all the Roman legionaries. Your Evocati, extremely high melee attack, still the low charge bonus, decent melee defense and armor, very cost-effective units. Then you have the first cohort, low melee attack, so it doesn't get a lot of use, but it has the encourage ability. Then you have your legionaries, low melee attack, pretty cheap units, but they will lose to a lot of units in the game. Legionary cohorts, more armor than the standard legionaries, but other than that they are pretty similar, but at only 30 extra, that 10 armor is pretty useful. Then we have the veteran legionaries. These guys have a bit lower melee attack than your Evocati cohorts, but they are a bit cheaper as well, and other than that their stats are identical. So both of these guys are very solid for the main line of Roman infantry, and the same is the legionary cohort. Now we got to the Praetorians. We have the quintessential Roman unit with a crappy charge bonus and very high melee attack and decent weapon damage. These guys have more weapon damage than your standard Roman units. Very good morale on the Praetorian cohort, can get a lot of kills. They have the whip ability, which can be used to increase their resistance to fatigue and weapon damage when they are in a fatigued state. So for your standard Roman army, people usually like to mix Polybian and Marian units, which is something I'm not a huge fan of thematically and game balance wise, because that allows you to bring the most cost-effective swords from the early era, and it allows you to bring the most cost-effective swords from the late era. And this is going to enable Rome to bring fairly strong cavalry to support as well, and bring a lot of cavalry. So if Rome doesn't want to bring in skirmishers, just a skirmishing unit to take care of enemy elephants, then Rome can bring a lot of cavalry that is able to get into enemy skirmishers and that is able to deny the rear charge to deny the charge to good enemy sword units. That will enable these veteran legionaries to grind it out. But you will see Roman builds with maybe only one Socii Equites and then some Syrian archers or some Balearic slingers. Now if you want to go for a more thematic Roman army, which I quite like, you can go for your Hastati, your cost-effective Principe, some Triarii. Then you have the option of going for Socii Equites, or if you want to go for more skirmishing capabilities, you can go for some Balearic slingers, or maybe Equites Extraordinari. You have a lot of options with Rome. If you want to go for a more Marian professional Roman army, you can go for your main line of legionary cohorts, backed up by some veteran legionaries, for example, and you can go for pretty strong auxiliary cavalry, or you can just go for cheap legionary cavalry from going up against enemy skirmishers, and this frees up funds to go for Syrian archers, and you can also go for more veteran legionaries, so you have a pretty strong line of infantry. So pretty typical Roman stuff. You're going to bring a lot of good sword infantry and some light cavalry support or some auxiliary Syrian archers. So for the spear options in the Polybian era, you only have really the auxiliary infantry. No, in the Marian era, sorry. You have the auxiliary infantry with very low melee attack but good capabilities against large units. You also have the auxiliary Syrian archers, which are archers that are decent pretty standard missile damage, but they have the precision shot, they have the heavy shot, and they have 40 armor. So these guys will be able to take quite a lot of fire. A step up from the Equites, we have the legionary cavalry, just a bit more armor and a bit more morale, that's about it. But they have a lower melee defense. Then we have the auxiliary cavalry, pretty tanky for their price, but they will lose to a lot of the cavalry units in the game. And the Praetorian cavalry, which you won't see a lot of. It is very heavy melee cavalry, and the thing with very heavy melee cavalry is that it stops chariots more reliably than only heavy melee cavalry. Very tanky units, but extremely expensive, and bringing Praetorians is going to limit the amount of other good infantry units that you can bring. So Rome is currently an extremely strong faction, and especially because they can bring so many cost-effective sword units, and then they just need a few light tools to deal with enemy cavalry, enemy skirmishers. But skirmishing against Rome isn't really going to be effective because almost all of their units have shields which give them a 50% protection against incoming missiles. So dealing with Rome in this in the Emperor Edition is a very tall order. They are one of the most powerful factions in the game on the right maps, which means forest maps and maps with difficult terrain to maneuver for the more skirmish-oriented factions. But Rome still is vulnerable to elephants in the right circumstances, and Rome still is vulnerable to chariots. So that's it for Rome. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again on the battlefield.